All right, good evening. It is 11 minutes after 7, and we will be starting the administrative session of our Planning Commission meeting. First order of business would be approval of the minutes from the June 20th meeting.
I move that we approve the minutes of our last meeting.
Motion by Mr. Watson, seconded by Ms. Patuski. All in favor say aye. Aye. Carries unanimously. Okay, first item up for discussion is agenda item number 2, which is zoning referrals. So we have a text amendment for section 113 and 329, full service versus takeout restaurants.
Sure, and I can give you just a quick explanation. This is a petition from the Stratford Zoning Commission to itself. There had been a lot of discussion about some of the burdens that the zoning regulations had been putting on small businesses, delis that wanted to open, takeout pizza place, whatever it happened to be, not a full sit-down restaurant. We had some business owners who were coming in saying they wanted to open up a business in town, but were unwilling to spend $5,000 on a survey of the property, which is a requirement for a special case. So one of my suggestions to the Zoning Commission was that we start to differentiate between what a restaurant is and a takeout restaurant. So we created the two definitions. For a restaurant, pretty much stays the same. For the takeout, we basically established some criteria, which is, so the text is in two parts. The first part is just establishing the two definitions. And then section 3.29, which is the second proposed text, basically lays out the criteria for what would qualify for a takeout restaurant. One of the caveats is that if someone comes in to my office saying, I've got a 5,000 square foot takeout place, there are no seats, everyone's standing, if there's some really funky, unusual proposal for a takeout, I can send to the Zoning Commission at any point for a review. So there's that caveat there to kind of protect against the abnormal application that we might get. Yeah, I mean, I won't read through my assessment of the proposed text. I know you all have read that. It's consistent with the Plan of Conservation and Development in terms of allowing the town to better identify opportunities for redevelopment and revitalization. It simplifies the zoning code and increases the usefulness and understandability. It streamlines the development approval process and also allows us to better retain existing businesses. And that's pretty much all I have.
Can you give me an example of a takeout restaurant that's presently operating in town?
Okay, I do. If I could remember the name, it's the Gyro Place, which is across from 1111 Stratford Avenue. Yeah, it's a halal Turkish restaurant.
I think that's considered to be.
I don't know.
Across from the Pickle Barrel, it's on Stratford Ave. It's on that corner. They have, I mean, that's considered a full restaurant just because of the way when it went in under the existing regulations. They had to make sure that there was an up-to-date survey of the property in a little strip mall like that. It's been there for who knows how long. We're requiring them to go to a public hearing. It costs $700 when a vast majority of municipalities will say, restaurant, we want to see you at the public hearing. A takeout that has 3, 4, 5 seats, it's just an over-the-counter application. It's permitted in the zone. There's no need to send them to a public hearing and spend $5,000 to $7,000 just for an approval.
To try to attract more businesses like that without jumping through some of the monetary rules.
And to retain businesses.
So, is this working? I guess. I have a couple questions. This is not the totality of our regulations for restaurants, I assume. I'm just thinking of I don't know why, but once again, I'm thinking of WPCA. And I know that restaurants have grease trap requirements and all of that. Will that have any effect on any of those regulations, any of the public safety regulations,
Nope.
any of the public health?
Still requires a permit from the health department. That's where all that
So
gets.
all of that still exists no matter what the levels of these are.
No change. If you're
Okay.
serving food, you need a health department approval.
There's a description here that's not in the original that talks about timing of establishment being open and also liquor license for full service. And it soon, I read it several times, and it tended to suggest that possibly that might be part of their takeout. I don't know if we want to change that, make sure we're very clear that no, we're not saying you can do takeout with your your Mac burger. You can do, a good cold beer along with your Big Mac kind of thing. As long as
In which
that's
section?
my misreading, but that's what in reading it.
No, and that was what we wanted to make very clear, was that a takeout restaurant would not be able to serve alcohol unless they went to, because you can go to a takeout restaurant and still sit down. You can have up to 10 seats.
10 seats.
Is that inside and or outside?
Nope, this is just inside.
Just inside. So we're not opening the door for people to put a umbrella and chairs outside.
Not without going to the zoning commission for approval for that.
And what are our current regulations? Because I know that the restaurant at Short Beach, the planning board was very clear about we wanted that place to close by 10 o'clock, I believe. And then now, 3 months into the season, they've gotten permission from, I don't know if it's from the state liquor board or whatever, to stay open until midnight
Where?
at Short Beach.
The zoning commission approved that. They came for a modification of the approval,
Okay,
and the zoning commission approved that.
so there's nothing we can do about it at this point. But I just think that is midnight in a residential area something that we are going to say? Is that what the current regulations say?
No. What we did was we actually added that safeguard in there that says that if there is a residential site adjacent to this, then it can't open prior to 6, and it can't stay open after midnight, because that's actually more restrictive than what's current.
So currently we have no restriction?
Which is allowed by the state. The state says, to be honest, I don't know 100% know exactly what the state's, how late you're able to stay open, but I know that this is actually more restrictive than what that is. Because we wanted to keep in mind that if you do have a takeout restaurant that is in a commercial zone, we're not opening the door to takeout restaurants in any new zones, but if there's one that's in a commercial zone but there's a residential house behind it, we wanted to be somewhat sensitive to those residents that are adjacent.
I don't know if it's this one or one of the other pieces we're looking at tonight, but there's reference to character several times in one of these documents. Let me just make sure that this is the character one. Yeah, under the pod, it talks about community character.
And they both the ones that we're talking about tonight, I address community character.
I guess that goes back again to our overall design of any business, of what our requirements are, correct? We're not giving anything away in terms of our ability to influence what they're doing.
Well, you're giving away the opportunity to look at a deli. Do you want to sit? Yes, you're not requiring a deli to come with no seats to come for a restaurant approval.
Okay.
That's what you're giving away.
Okay.
You're saying, we think that that's a retail use that is not significant, that is not of significant approval that's going to change the dynamic, as opposed to a 50-seat restaurant with a liquor permit that can hold private events or whatever.
My final question is, as a small business person, if I were trying to open a restaurant, take out whatever, get a start in being in the restaurant business, this sounds good to me. if I was opening up if it was my first shop and I wanted to build a business and, get my cooking skills in order and all those kinds of things, it sounds like a great way to encouraging small business. How many, I don't know if you can call, how many big chain places fall into this same thing?
Any chain that has a takeout restaurant that operates as takeout. So Domino's Pizza, anything that would fall within that criteria of less than 10 seats. They don't have liquor. It's primarily takeout. I don't know. I think what you are catering more to, though, is your small business owner as opposed to your chain or franchise. But that's not to say that there's not a possibility for a franchise to come in. But if they want to come in, they can come in. And there's no financial burden for them to do that currently.
It's less of a burden. They still have to deal with the health department, which is very expensive. I know that from friends that have tried to do this.
So, for example, Gaetano's that went in up there, they had to jump through.
They had to go as a
lot of these
restaurant.
hoops. They had to pay for the survey, the whole 9 yards.
They happen to be doing significant renovations there that required them to have a survey anyways. So that was all part of it. They didn't have to do it on their own. But if I wanted to open up a deli across the street at the EMS, let's say EMS was gone,
right,
and I wanted to set it up, I would have to get a survey, I would pay most likely anywhere between, they're usually around $5,000 for a survey. And then the fees to come, and then potentially to pay an attorney. The public hearing process is expensive.
Wow.
So
we're avoiding that initial cost for those people.
And what we tried to do was, if there was ever something like I said, some really bizarre application that came in that didn't fit the intent and purpose of what we were trying to do, I can send it to the zoning commission at any point for a review.
Well, that's my other question that I ran reading this. Is this a self-description? I'm a takeout restaurant, or is this something that we decide for them? You are a takeout. Because if the requirements are different, it seems to me that you could say I'm this and then end up being that by simply buying dishes suddenly. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, you could come in and say that
they're going to transition, or even seasonally. The difference between what you get at Uberti's in the summertime versus in the wintertime are very, very different.
I guess maybe if I'm not understanding, correct me, but actually, you got to repeat the question because I had it, and then I was thinking about your second comment about.
Is it something that they're self-describing?
Oh, that's the way it always works.
Okay.
You came into my office, you said, I'm going to open up a grocery store.
Okay.
I look, you tell me, I say, all right, what's your plan? How do you want to set it up? You show me a floor plan. I say, this is not a grocery store, you're a restaurant. If you want to go in under these parameters that you're proposing, I'm interpreting your use as a restaurant, you need to go to the zoning commission. Or
ultimately, you're going to have to make that decision when they come into you for permits.
Correct.
You're going to have to look at it and say, no, you're doing takeout. That's all you're doing. You have 8 seats. This is what you are. So we depend upon you for that.
And that's what you depend on. And every single time someone comes in to set up a business or do a single family or a 2-family, that's what we do. We look and we say, yes, this is what you're trying to apply for is how we're interpreting what you're applying for.
And during the time that you've been here, a short time, have you had to have people walked away from your desk and said, I can't afford all of that initially?
Just 2 months ago, we had someone that said they were between us and Milford, and
so
they went to
left.
Milford. It was Italian. No, it was like an Eastern European type of takeout place.
Right.
If Gaetano's were to apply right now, and this were the definition, what would they be considered?
What we're proposing, if this was currently in place,
Yes.
what would they be required to do?
Well, what would they be considered, takeout or restaurant?
They have no seats, as far as I know. Well, they went
they
and
have
got
it
outdoor.
outside.
So, if they were coming in for no seats, as is, then they would go to the, then they wouldn't go anywhere. If they have the outdoor seats, the outdoor dining, that would go to the zoning commission for an outdoor dining.
That's what I guess that's what I was saying is, in the wintertime, they're not going to have outdoor seats, but in the summertime, they're going to put as many as they can. We
could have more than 10.
We now have, we either have something that has to be worked out and resolved after the fact, or, does that make any sense at all?
I'm not sure I understand, so.
So you're saying that
Well,
if you have,
seasonal, what I'm saying is seasonal patios. That,
if you have a seasonal patio, that puts you under the definition of a full-service restaurant?
if you have more than 10 seats.
I thought he said, Mr. Bansky said
Is
no.
what you're, is the question that you have, right?
Well, what Mr. Bansky said earlier was, as long as you had more than 9 seats or 10 seats, you were a full-service restaurant.
Right.
If it were inside, though.
No, he didn't say, he said it could be inside or outside.
Inside or outside?
So a
10
combined,
seats or more, you're a restaurant, on the roof, in the parking lot,
Okay, I thought,
anywhere.
I misunderstood.
So then what we need to do is to say that someone coming in needs to know that whether you have this, or this, in all cases, if you, even including outside, if you plan on having outside, then you need to register as a full-service restaurant.
Or we're going to come after you.
Or we're
doing-
gonna come
we're-
after- I mean,
no,
we need to
come
make
after
sure
we
that
come
this
and we
text
don't know.
is clear about that in that sense. Otherwise, we're not helping them out because first year of hitting someone with that when they put out their picnic tables in the spring, we're going to end up making a bunch of enemies again in terms of making their life easier.
I'm not sure I would agree. And this is why. We had a similar case where there was someone who came and they applied for something. And they went and started doing other things that they weren't allowed to do. And they said, well, it's your fault for not telling us. Well, I would actually turn around and say, it's your fault for not telling us what your plan is. We ask you what your plan is to do. When you come in to set up a takeout restaurant, I would say, okay, everything's inside. You're only allowed to have this many seats. That's what you're approved to do, just the way the regulation says. We could add, and I think that it might not be a bad idea, that you could say 8 or more, or 10 or less seats, inside or outside. I'm not sure which perspective you actually are proposing, you're in favor of. So, but you could
I think that would be perfect. I think that would solve the problem.
inside or outside.
Yeah, because then it doesn't matter. We don't have to talk seasonal. We don't have to talk anything else. If you have any more than 10 seats, that's the category you fit into, period. Boom. And that solves that problem. It might require fine reading on their part, but at least then you can say, Jay, that's right in the regulations. Always been.
I think we could say it.
how about combined? Right? What if they have 9 seats
Yeah,
inside
you're right.
year
Fine.
round, and then they put
Yeah.
Good point.
10 outside in the
Yep.
summer? Then they're over.
And the concern about doing that might be, and this is something that you all need to consider, is are we moving away from what a takeout restaurant is? I don't know.
By allowing seats or?
By
not
allowing outdoor,
Seating.
So
by
the-
saying you can be a takeout restaurant and have 1 seat inside and 8 outside.
Like a Danny's hot dog stand.
I've never been there, but I know what you're
Yeah.
talking about. But
There's really no seating inside. You could stand, obviously, but, you know, people, it is a takeout place, basically, but some people sit out on the picnic tables and have their hamburger.
Well, I just, consistency with Complete Streets would say that we should encourage them to have those outside tables as much as possible in season.
possible suggestion. And this would get taken care of in the definition section, section 1.13 that we're talking about. What I would say is the last line of a takeout definition, we would say, but not limited to delicatessens and or restaurants with 9 or less seats combined, or inside and outside.
and outside, combined. Thank you.
Sorry, I
Can I-
didn't understand fully what you were saying. Now it makes sense.
Can you define adjacent to any residential zone property?
Next to?
What about across the street?
No. Would not. It would touch the property.
It has to touch them.
It just seems to me that you want to also be concerned about the people across the street who are going to have to deal with the traffic coming in and out of this takeout or deli. They may not be adjacent to it, but they're going to get affected by the traffic.
But we're not changing where they're allowed. None of that is changing, so I'm not sure how that would impact this. Maybe I'm missing it, but I could see how if we were saying takeouts or restaurants are now allowed in different residential zones, but we're not doing that. So currently, anywhere you can put a takeout restaurant, you can put a restaurant. So putting that caveat onto the takeout would seem a bit. I mean, why would we handcuff a takeout as opposed to a general restaurant, which could go in there and do the same and probably be more impactful?
I think maybe we should, because it would be more impactful. In either case, it can have an effect on the people across the street.
But if the idea is to be less stringent on trying to get people in, why would we want to start making it harder for them? With, will it make it harder for those people if we start imposing parking regulations and how traffic flow?
No, it really has to do with the hours of operation and the effect on it says adjacent residential zone property. So if I can open up a takeout from 6 a.m. to, if I read this right, if I say I'm not adjacent to any residential, but across the street from me is a residential neighborhood. So according to this, I can open up at 5 in the morning and stay open till 2 o'clock. Now, I'm not affecting the people abutting me, but I am affecting the people across the street from me who are residents.
Give me an example where that happens in town. Where
I knew you were going to ask me that. I was trying to think of one, but
The halal place, perfect example. It's got 1111 Stratford Avenue,
across the
111
street.
units right across the street.
Yeah.
Wood End Road, maybe? I don't know what's in there. If there's,
there's
there's that
Cibus,
Latin fusion
yeah.
place
Cibus.
is there.
Yep. And we're not saying they can't have it. We're just controlling the hours. Am I right in reading this?
What you're
If-
proposing, I'm not sure exactly. You would be restricting the hours.
We're
Make
restricting
hours.
them from being able to.
Past what the state laws
Can't open.
allow businesses like this to stay open till. Which
can't open at
I'm
4
not
in the
sure I
morning.
would advocate for that. I mean, I think you're almost better off letting the state dictate what these type of establishments are allowed to be open till. But I think there's always a special case where, let's say that someone, for example, wanted to come put one in across the street from where you live. And I look at it and I say, this is really a residential neighborhood. This is not a commercial district. This is in the heart. There's no other residential things anywhere. I'm going to send this to the zoning commission and let them make the call. That's the safeguard, I think.
I'm thinking of like Gino's restaurant. The Gino's Pizza place used to be right next to the ale house, and then they moved down the street.
Okay.
And there are some residents across the street on Barnum Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
If you go past the 2 gas stations and head down, not Boston, but Barnum.
Yeah.
you know, there are some homes across the street from the pizza place, and I would assume that's a takeout, fast food takeout. Just as an example.
Probably. My concern is that if there are residents around them, across the street, next to them, they should also have to not open prior to 6 a.m. and not open after 12 midnight. I'm not saying they can't have it. I'm just saying, you know, they should have the same guidelines as if they were a resident right next to the takeout.
Well, why are we differentiating between a restaurant and a takeout in this particular clause?
I think to make it easier for the incoming business, correct? To attract more businesses.
To make it easier for a business to locate in Stratford.
I'm thinking takeout too is probably like, you know, you get your coffee in the morning maybe. It's the type of service.
It
I don't think
depends.
Not before 5 a.m. either. I'm not sure what, or
Aren't there
6
many
a.m. to
restaurants that
midnight.
need to be open at, you know,
6
most-
a.m. to midnight is fine. I'm not
that's what this is proposing.
correct.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with it except for the word adjacent.
Oh, okay.
Because as you've defined it, adjacent is next to a back or a budding. And what I'm saying is that's fine, but what about the people across the street? They are not considered adjacent.
When we require informing property owners in the vicinity, what is that standard requirement?
A budding.
It's only abutting?
That-
Okay. And that doesn't include the people across the street?
No,
Just a budding.
So that's the law.
that doesn't make it right. That just is
I
the
know, I'm
current
just saying.
law.
Look, you can make it anything you want. But the intent and purpose of this was to make it easier and not more difficult. I'm not saying that what you're proposing is not the right thing to do, but that's just what the intent was and the direction I was given from the zoning commission on how to write it. This is what they had suggested that we do.
Well, we're going to send this back to the zoning commission with a favorable recommendation. Can we put Pat's concern?
Sure.
I mean, they don't have to accept it.
No,
But your concern could be noted that.
that's fine.
I mean, we usually do that anyway.
Could we also request that they change this takeout to say expedited approvals or something of that sort? So that the person coming in knows that we're throwing away caution for you to encourage you, but do something so that this is not necessarily the way we do business, but in your case, we're going to do this. Because I think that's one of the things that we get in trouble with when something goes into a neighborhood and everybody then looks at us saying, how could you let that happen in my neighborhood?
And I didn't know anything about it. All of a sudden, it appeared.
So
And I'm right
Can you
across the
repeat that?
street.
Because I was taking down a note from the last thought about how we wanted to differentiate between.
I just think that if we could add something even under either a sub underneath 329, take out restaurant saying planning or whoever has created an expedited process to encourage new business in this instance. So that it doesn't refer to all of our other. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because otherwise we're saying we'll throw out any rules for anything that anybody that wants to open a business. But what we're really doing here is saying we've chosen businesses that we know it's tough to get open, that they're small businesses, and we want to encourage that. I just think that it makes sense that we're not doing it for everybody. We're not saying you want to open a gas station, we'll throw out the rules for you. We're saying for these, because these are beneficial to the community, and they don't take away They shouldn't take away from property value. They should actually provide a service
Won't that
to
word
the
get out
public.
there though, once word gets out there that, it's a little bit easier to, rather than writing it someplace. I'm sure once the word gets out that you don't have to pay the $5,000 for the, this, and you don't have to do this, it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, generally, you don't justify the text amendment. The justification is you're voting to say, or someone's voting to say, this is better for the town, this is consistent with the POCD, we approve it. It's not to say that you can't do that.
My only feeling about it is that I agree with Ms. Potesta in the sense that I don't like that adjacent. You know what I mean? I want the neighbors to buy in if we're going to put something in there. But I'm willing to say, let's suffer through it if we find some way of making it clear that we're doing this for a real purpose. That
Keep in mind, these aren't going in a residential zone. This is not allowed in a residential zone. This is someone who lives near Barnum Avenue. Like, they back up to Barnum Avenue.
so this is only a commercial zone.
That's where restaurants are allowed. They're not allowed in residential zones.
Then why do you have hours of operation for a takeout located on a site adjacent to any residential zone property?
Because you can have a site that's adjacent to a
Yeah,
residential
Barnum
zone.
There has to be a line about
Barnum
has
Avenue,
all the
where
housing
like-
behind it.
different zones butt up against each other.
Yeah, I can think of several
All of
projects
Main Street.
that are happening that this is coming up for a reason. But
I guess my concern would be to expand what, not just adjacent and abutting, but within 100 feet. I don't,
I think I see what you're saying. Maybe a recommendation could be for the zoning commission to closely consider the impacts of the term adjacent as opposed to some radius of 1,000 square feet or whatever.
I'm not defining I just don't want it to forget about the residents across the street. Barnum Avenue, probably not a big deal, but when you get into small areas, Honey
it's not
Spot
true because
Road,
the whole back of Barnum on the north side, on my side, it's all residential the whole way.
yeah, but that's in the back.
Still,
You know what comes to mind, Pat? Remember the old, on Nichols Avenue across from Nichols School, the corner deli? I mean,
Yes.
there's
Barber shop
homes
there.
up here.
Yes.
Now it's a barber shop.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a home to the, if you're looking at the school.
Right.
There's a home to the right, there's homes across the street.
Yep.
There's homes.
On both streets.
On both sides.
Nichols and
North
North.
Avenue. That's kind of what you're talking about,
Yeah,
something in a residential area.
yeah, and that was a
And they used to
deli
open
at
early in the morning.
Bruce Avenue. There's a deli there. Convenience store, I believe. And there's homes all around it. I don't care that they have the deli there. I just would want some more checks and balances if they're going to open up before 6 and 12 midnight. Because that has an effect on,
If there's an existing deli
Residents.
and someone leaves the deli, take for example the one up on Nichols Avenue, used to be a deli, now it's a barber shop, and somebody sells it, and then somebody comes in and wants to put another deli there, do they have to jump through all of these hoops? No.
As long as they resume exactly what was approved before.
Oh, we're just talking about new businesses coming in. So somehow that got approved way back when.
yeah, well, maybe they did a survey, or maybe this language was
The
different.
adjacent business.
my other question is the next point, talking about garbage, with one can for every 9, 10
10 seats.
seats. So if they have nine, seats, they don't have to have a garbage can?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Because our earlier thing says that it's below, it's a takeout if they have less than 9 seats. And this statement says that they have to have one trash can for every 10 seats.
Yeah, this was actually a typo from a previous iteration. It was originally 9, it was 10, it was 12. How we decided we want to do it, that should read 9.
Okay, so I wasn't wrong.
Okay.
And where did they come up with that number?
Well, we survey all the different regulations. Some towns say it's 2 seats, some say it's 15, some say it's 18.
And where does their commercial garbage go?
In a dumpster, wherever their landlord.
So that
provides.
dumpster is required through health department, not through this regulation.
Nope.
So their dumpster needs and all that.
If they need one, it would go.
That's
that would
all.
be done
They'll make the determination if there's any waste that needs to be dumpstered. Okay.
in order to get their license.
Okay.
Any other questions, folks?
Not me.
All drive-ins and drive-through restaurants are considered full service, correct? I'm reading that. So like,
Yes.
I don't know, a Starbucks with only a few seats inside but has a drive-through, is that considered a full-service restaurant?
And for lightness, where do we have in here that will give them special compensation if they put a bike rack in?
I'm not sure we're that attracted to businesses yet.
So do we have a motion to approve the text amendment for drive-in and full service, or takeout and full-service restaurant? We have a favorable recommendation.
I'd like to make a recommendation. We send this back to zoning with a favorable recommendation, including, except for the inclusion of 2 corrections that we had given. 1, 9 to 10, or 10 to 9, and also the addition of a phrase at the end of a paragraph that specifies
It'd be inclusive of inside and outside seating.
inside and outside in terms of the number of seats.
All right, so do we have a motion for a favorable recommendation, including wording to change the number of seats to 9 inside, outside, and also to change the refuge storage area to read 1 trash receptacle for every 9 seats?
And can we also add, to send on to the zoning commission a concern about the site adjacent definition for hours of operation, and change it to, a suggestion would be to change it to include either homes across the street or within a certain radius of the location.
I second it.
Do we have to get that in writing?
Any discussion?
I
If
think
that's what the commission wants, if they want to add it as a recommendation, yes, we would. Got to hash out the exact language that you folks want.
So Pat, you want to, Ms. Patusky, you want to rephrase that last, if we want to include that? How do we want to word that?
What did I say?
We advise zoning.
So
So
adjacent
We're,
and, or,
we're asking them to consider a concern of the planning commission as to the wording for hours of operation when located on a site adjacent to any residential zone property. That our concern is that the word adjacent should be expanded to include homes across the street or within a certain radius.
I would just say a certain radius, because across the street can mean a lot of different things. I think the more specific we are,
Well, how about a radius of, I'm trying to think what, a street is 10 feet,
100 feet,
100 feet.
100-foot radius. That's 32.
So that would take into account somebody across the street.
3.291.
okay.
And this specifically is residential. We're not talking commercial.
So this motion is, motion made by Mr. Watson, seconded by Mr. Senft. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Whew. So much for a quick meeting. Okay, so...
Oh, there's another.
So the second item under zoning referrals would be the text amendment, section 612, restaurants in LB zones.
No, that's-
So this basically, I'll just give you, there's not much to this one. This basically allows for full service and takeout restaurants to be allowed in Stratford Center. Currently, the way the regulations read, restaurants are not a permitted use in an LB zone. I know we have a few restaurants in Stratford Center. That was before use variances were allowed. So in order for Acapulco's to be allowed inside the LB zone, they had to go for a use variance and say the board has asked the Board of Zoning Appeals to allow for their restaurant in that zone, even though it's not allowed. Maybe a decade ago, it was, or less than that, maybe it was 6 years ago, the town attorney determined that use variances were not constitutional or illegal, so the town no longer grants use variances. So the zoning commission and myself, we had been working on a regulation that would do exactly what the applicant has proposed. I, in fact, actually consulted with the applicant about how we wanted it to read. That's essentially it. It's consistent with the plan of conservation and development. It's the exact type of development that we want to see in Stratford Center. It aligns with other long-range visions and concepts, such as complete streets and TOD. That's it.
May I make a general comment?
Mr. Watson?
In reading this, I kind of feel like the zoning is writing us out of the picture. That there ought to be some reference back to planning, especially until our town gets a real town planner who can come up with design standards for some of these, because I think it's a harder thing for zoning to weigh in on some of our design standards, and this seems to be something that, unless I'm totally wrong,
Where would you want the planning commission to come in?
I don't know. And maybe it's as simple as saying planning and zoning, or zoning and planning, or that we both would weigh in on this. The other, because it seems like we are, unless I'm in totally the wrong one.
No, you got the right one.
It mentions the historic district, or it mentions the character districts, that what we're saying here, and there isn't any part of this. If we're taking it away from special case and making it more straight up, we are taking away the ability to be able to comment on the process of looking out for things like the historic district, of looking out for adaptive reuse and those kinds of things in some of this. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm overstepping.
Under what circumstances would the planning commission be involved in any of this right now without the...
A restaurant?
Yeah.
Never.
Never, right?
Never.
Yeah.
This is a recommending body.
Yeah.
Unless for subdivisions or POCD, the planning commission is only a recommending body.
And is an LB zone
We're not in.
residential?
No,
So then why are we being asked to comment on this?
because you have to comment anything planning related. Any amendments to the zoning regulations require a recommendation from a planning commission, if a town has one.
And once again, the impetus of this is it would make it easier for new businesses to come in?
Well, yeah, I mean, it would allow for restaurants to come in, period.
Restaurants to come in, period.
To the center of town we're talking about.
Anywhere in an LB district, which is the center of town.
Where there
So-
are several restaurants already.
Correct. The LB district goes from Barnum Avenue on Main Street, a little bit over towards the pizza and Curran Place, 1 block over to King, and then down to the railroad, to the flagpole. That's the LB district. It's our civic district, Stratford Center. Basically, the entire TOD is over the LB district. But for someone who doesn't want to build a TOD and they just want to put a restaurant in, this would allow them to do that.
The civic district doesn't encompass also Baldwin Center and Sterling House?
Pretty sure, actually, I know it doesn't. That's an RS4. I was working with someone on the Baldwin Center today.
Any further discussion?
They're basically just giving us the stamp of approval for their amendment that they came up with, the proposed text. They're looking for our approval.
Well, they're looking for your recommendation as to whether or not you folks feel this is consistent with the plan of conservation and development. Yeah,
And,
that's it.
I'm not sure it's who's responsible, but the development of these guidelines, architectural guidelines and landscaping guidelines, does that fall within the planning commissions, since it's in the POCD, to come up with standards?
You could write a letter to the zoning commission and say this is something that we would like to see, and then the zoning commission votes as to whether or not they decide they want to do that, and then they would send it back to you for a recommendation back to them. So yes, but you wouldn't develop them necessarily yourselves, although you wouldn't vote on them. You can propose anybody to do anything, is I guess what I'm saying. So if there are design standards that you want to consider, you would write a letter to the zoning commission as the planning commission.
Well, reading through this for the 5th time, all we're really doing here is saying all they are asking to do is to add full service or take out restaurants to an existing piece.
That's it.
That's it.
That's it.
So
We're not taking away
if we
power
don't
from
care,
anybody.
the battle still has to be fought, whether it's appropriate.
Exactly. It still has to go to the zoning commission.
Okay.
Do we have a motion to accept a favorable recommendation, send a favorable recommendation to zoning for text amendment regarding section 612 restaurants in LB zone?
Make that motion?
Motion by Ms. Petusky,
Seconded.
seconded by Mr. Watson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. No one opposed. The motion passes unanimously. Okay, so now we're on agenda item number 3, which is the campsite plan review.
There are no campsite plan reviews.
Item 4, 824 review.
There are no 824 reviews.
Item 5, discussion of town plan of conservation and development.
There are no active items that we have.
Okay, item 6, discussion of section 5.3 of the zoning regulations. Do you have any?
Yeah, we had been discussing this at length probably since I started here for almost about a year and a half. We talked about some potential options for how we wanted to revise Section 5.3. I took a lot of those recommendations, as well as just adding in some planning language. We sent it to the Zoning Commission, and they felt that they were unwilling to act on it. So currently, the cap of apartment development in the town is still in place. No apartments can be built anywhere in town. That's it.
But that's not stopping us from building apartments, right?
Yeah.
Well, your TOD is exempt. The Transit Ordinance Development District is exempt.
Oh,
Do we have to do something with this?
We can, or that was really just a handout.
Okay. Let's see. The status of research on medical marijuana regulations and methadone clinics.
Yeah, so the zoning chair had instructed myself to prepare the formal application. That went out yesterday to all to the state, the regional planning council governments, as well as our abutting council of governments. So expect to see a formal review for that maybe next month for the medical marijuana regulations that were drafted.
Item number 8, erosion and sediment control.
Nothing new.
Number 9, we have Greenway project.
Nothing from me.
Complete streets.
on the Greenway project, has that been approved by the town council?
I have no idea.
They approved something that went to them this past meeting. They approved, whatever you sent to them, they approved it because I spoke with Beth.
Was it coastal or was it the Greenway?
No, it was the Greenway.
Because I remember being at a meeting and they wanted to have more information on the Greenway plan before they would
Oh,
approve it.
This is Elm Street. That's what it was. That must be Elm Street that went to them. They did approve something. I don't know what it was, but I got 2 telephone calls saying they just approved your Greenway project. I was like, what?
We might be able to get an update from Commissioner Vesey when he returns, because I don't have any updates.
So 9C, coastal resiliency.
But for the complete streets, I'll just go back to B. We wrapped up and closed out the Phase 2 project for our pilot project. We've got 25% design. Didn't cost us any money. We were just able to use some of the leftover money from the plan to push this project to 25% design. In the next 2 months, we will be going up to DOT to go over the 25% design, which they've essentially already green-lighted, so we'll see what happens with that. We're also currently in the process of drafting the complete streets policy for the town. We've sent out the regulations the policy to the Community Advisory Committee. We just finished getting, maybe a week or 2 ago, maybe longer, I can't remember, all comments and feedback from the proposed policy. And we are putting that into a revised version that we'll be sending out in the next few weeks.
Thank you. Coastal resiliency. Do we have any comment on that?
Yep, we just let's see.
May I ask a question first about complete streets?
Mr. Watson?
Yes, thank you, sorry. There are two things that have come up. The Nichols School turnabout. Is the DOT involved in that at all?
No.
Okay. And the I-95 exchanges that are coming up, do we have any representation at their meeting in terms of the fact that that's part of the East Coast Greenway and that I'd gotten some commitment out of them as a citizen 6 or 8 months ago to make sure they acknowledge that and put that into the Ferry Boulevard section going over to the Devon Bridge. But
Exit 33 you're talking about? Is that the exit 33?
they're doing
Is that what
they're
it's
doing
called?
a meeting, and I don't even know where. I think it's in Middletown or some place that it's our public meeting. It's going to be up there, but does this ring any bells?
I know what you're talking about. No, I don't go to those meetings up in Wethersfield about what they plan on doing. I've seen some of the conceptual designs. As far as I know, that project is at a stop sign indefinitely until further notice. That's just what I've heard.
Oh, okay.
But
The Greenway or the exit?
Exit 33, the interchange.
Okay.
And the representative for the town that would be handling that is the engineering department. They handle all the roadway design. And, so.
Thank you.
So the coastal resiliency plan, we have begun the enrollment process into the CRS program, the community rating system. Once we get on the scale, we can we can lower the insurance premiums from anyone in a flood zone from 5 to 15%. Today we had our confirmed appointment field visit from with FEMA. Their representative from Washington, D.C. will be coming up. I will be giving them a tour of the town. We'll be going over all of the floodplain policies that the town has. That is essentially the first of 2 or 3 steps in order to become completely enrolled. So it usually takes anywhere from 6 to 8 months to get an appointment. And there was a town that dropped out, and we were on the list. So we went from an appointment next spring to an appointment next month. So really great stuff. We've been working really hard to get all our applications and everything in, and it paid off.
Oh, that's good news. All right, so item number 10, any comments or concerns?
I just want to thank Mr. Bansky for all of his hard work on coastal resiliency, because it really is going to pay off for us 10 years from now. And I really appreciate what you're doing.
Right.
My pleasure.
Anything else? Okay, then I guess it's time to adjourn.
I just wanted to,
One more, darn it.
There was one note, one memo that I handed out. The zoning commission, and this is not for discussion tonight, I just wanted to bring it to everybody, and then we can discuss it next month, unless you folks want to talk about it now. My thought was to just hand it out, let you folks digest it, because there's kind of a lot in here, and discuss it next month. But the zoning commission is considering revising the density in the TOD. They asked me to send a informal letter to you folks to consider some of the things that they are proposing. If we have any comments, we can send them back. I did my own assessment of what they were proposing. So I would just say read it, and we can discuss either tonight or next time we meet.
Mr. Watts?
May I ask you a question about this? Because I did read through it. A lot of it is similar to the discussion we had up on Holly Lane with square feet and apartment bedrooms or units or whatever. And also, this is written as a Todd piece. Does the POCD contain similar language that relates to the whole town?
In terms of density for square footage?
No. No. They only talk about increasing density where appropriate, most specifically adjacent to mass transit, or within close proximity to mass transit.
But like the Lordship Boulevard corridor and that area, does it qualify in terms of super apartments or whatever?
It could. It depends on what the town's priority is. The town may shift and say, we want less industrial, less businesses down there, less manufacturing style businesses, and we want more residents there. Then the town would, in its best interest, say, we feel that this is where higher densities are appropriate.
And their rationale for this change that they're proposing is that it would be too congested with more bedrooms. Congestion, that's basically their big concern within the TOD.
I think just the general consensus, without putting words in anyone's mouth, is they think it's too much.
Scale.
But I would add that what we're proposing, what we currently have, is about 25 bedrooms less per acre than what is the standard nationwide for.
And so in your opinion, you feel that this could move potential developers away from Stratford to another town?
Yeah, I don't know.
Possibly.
Possibly. I just think the incentive is there for a reason. And I understand that, look, we're not getting all the mixed use that we want. Let's decentivize people who just want to do straight residential. That makes sense to me. I understand the relationship there. But to lower the incentive for straight residential and lower the incentive for someone who's doing what you want, I'm not sure. I don't think I agree with that strategy.
I don't know how, I haven't really read this through in fine detail, but I have gone and I've been looking at TOD plans nationally, and I think part of what they're reacting to in this, or at least what my reaction has been to some of the projects that I see, is that there is such a thing as scale, and the one thing that made me choose Stratford was the scale. So we have to decide what is that worth to us in our future. How important is scale in terms of, I mean, it makes a big difference when you live in a big city. Scale has everything to do with neighborhood. A 20-story building in an area with 4-story brownstones can just destroy the feeling in that neighborhood. And when we have 5-story buildings with the size and mass of these, it is going to change the existing residential around it. So that we have to decide the value of this new building versus the value of the residential area that falls within its shadows or falls within a circle around that. Will those properties be reduced 10% because they're in the shadows? I mean, those kind of things, I don't think that the TOD does not discuss them other than saying character. It limits it to a very brief understanding. And when you go into read TODs nationally, this is not a new issue. This is not something that Stratford is facing. Every community faces this issue. And some of them have said we have to be very careful about what streets and what corners we allow this kind of scale, and that we have to say there are certain streets you can't do this on. And we have to do the hard work to localize where we will allow this kind of building. I just think that this is a good step forward to saying we want to make this an issue, or we want to address this issue that is an issue in some way that's sensible for not just the citizens but also for the builders, so that we have something that can be negotiated. Otherwise, indecision is court judges are going to be the only other option that we have in some of these cases. So I think that I'll read this very carefully and see. I think it's a good effort at the beginning. I don't know if it's the answer.
And something that I think it's important to think about is to wipe your mind free of any application that we know of, because you don't want to hamstring all good projects for one that we don't think fits. And I think it can be dangerous to say, all right, we're just going to bring everything down and really limit ourselves where with some properties that might be a little tighter, more confined, some smaller plots of land in center of town that we didn't really think about when we dropped some of these things down. And I think part of the problem is that the larger plots of land within the TOD have gone first, which makes sense. Those are the ones people can make the most money on. So we've seen these really out of what seem, or they could be appear, or maybe they are out of scale, and that's scaring people. But it's also important to keep in mind that there's really only 2 or 3 of those properties in town. There are very, very few. And my concern with changing them so dramatically based on these a few applications is that we're a bit knee-jerk reaction to some of the things that take 10, 15, 20 years to actually develop, not 2 years. I mean, it's only been around for 2 years, the TOD. So I'm not trying to convince you one way or the other, but it's just something that we need to think about how it affects the entire district, not just one property or one project. That's it.
I suggest people keep reading, because there's a lot of design guidances, and I think Ms. Patuski's suggestion that we hire a design to develop design guidelines for the town is still, it's exactly why we need that. I'm sure it's not cut in the budget, but that would actually help us, allow us to do these kind of things. If we had some sense of what control we had over what was going in these spaces.
Here, more planning money.
Oh, I'm serious.
Here.
The idea of setbacks were what allowed buildings to be taller in New York City and perfectly functional. We could apply the same thing here.
Any other comments? We have a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Sem, seconded by Ms. Patuski. Meeting ends at 8:17. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you to our chair.
Nice job, Sheriff.
Want to sign it, or?
We're going to let you put your Hancock on.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Right
Don't
below
worry,
my
they'll
name.
send you the bill tomorrow.
Below my name. and
Oh,
I'll
right
send
here?
you the next one, yeah. That's it.